off with a question. And the question, I think, requires a minute of explanation first before we get into it. Essentially, we said there's heaven and earth, right? And we called it more or less the Aretz and the Sadeh, the land and the field. The land represents the regular world, physical world, I guess, and the field represents the spiritual realms of Gan Eden. And we said that there's an advantage in the land with coal, right? That if coal will come down into the land, then the land has an advantage. What's coal? Coal represents Yesod, right? Because what the reasons we said yesterday. And inside of Yesod, coal also is the gematria of 50, which means the 50 gates of Bina also reside in Yesod. And so in all that, the Bina and the Yesod, which is all called coal, will be in the land. Then the land has an advantage over the field. And the field anyway basically is called coal, right? Because the field is the Gan Eden, realm of Gan Eden. But when that realm of Gan Eden dips down and the same light of Gan Eden can be experienced also on the earth, so that it's basically having heaven on earth is greater than just heaven as it would be by itself, and certainly greater than earth would be by itself. And we said that the existence of heaven and earth together in the same place, which is basically short-circuiting the orderly system of the Hishtalshlus, is only possible if a light beyond the Hishtalshlus is available. So whenever you see the heaven on earth type of scenario, it's a sign that Keter is there. Because only Keter, which is beyond the Hishtalshlus, can enable it to be that the level of coal will be residing in the earth. Follow this?
We should lower Keter, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but that was sort of outside the mimer.
Okay.
No, it's true, but it was outside the mimer. I mean, I brought that in just as a kind of I was poking around.
A different
concept.
So, that being said, we have a question, because the whole thing we liken to the notion of the fullness of the moon. And when the moon is not full, like it's empty from our perspective, we don't see any moon, it's still full on its upper part. In other words, the part that we don't see is still the sun's still lighting it up. And that is like Gan Eden, right? That the higher part of Malchut, let's say the moon is the two parts of Malchus, right? That's how, this is another part we didn't speak about. We spoke about it yesterday. So the higher part of Malchus receives from Yesod, because it touches the sphere above it, which is Yesod. And therefore it's sort of always lit up. It's always full, because it represents Gan Eden. Whereas the lower part of Malchus, that's the one that can be absent of light. And when it will be full, we'll call that the full moon then, that's a sign that the higher light has made its way down to the lower place, and it's the 15th of the month. This is the Indian that every 15th of the month is a holiday because Keter is shining, enabling the light part of the moon to also dip down and fill up the dark part of the moon. Right? So here was our question. It sounds like, wait, one more preface to that, sorry. The other thing we said was when Hashem created the world, He removed 5 partsufim. Ata asisas hashamayim. You made the heavens. And the word Ata is written without a hey. And it comes to teach us that a hey partsufim, 5, stages of divinity were removed when Hashem created the world, because those were too powerful to exist while the world was meant to experience itself. And therefore there's this tremendous removal of divinity in order to create the status of existence, right? And nonetheless, in the realms of Gan Eden, we find that removal was replenished.
Is that from the first Tzimtzum?
Yeah.
Right.
Basically all the Tzimtzum, presently into this day, in order for us to experience the world, Hashem is removing all these different levels of light in order for us to experience ourselves. But in Gan Eden, he's saying that those levels were replenished. In other words, that although the Tzimtzum might have happened, but the revelation came back to a certain strong degree. As he's saying to the point of it's called the fullness of the moon. There's nothing lacking there. Let's just look at the actual Lashon. He says, because we see that Gan Eden is called by the name Kol, in fact, and Kol means everything without any lack. We see that Gan Eden doesn't really have this lack. In other words, maybe it had it in order to get to the point of creation, but the whole idea is that the higher worlds, they experience the revelation.
Right, the light.
So therefore, we're saying that their moon is sort of already full. So why are we saying that the moon is only full, there's only a fullness of the moon when the field will be worked? We didn't really bring this part into it yet, but the idea of the field will be worked, we said, was melech l'sadeh ne'avad, right? That the melech, which is the melech ilah, this level of Keter, only comes in when the field is worked, i.e. that the field is able to send its light down to the earth, and then that engenders the presence of this melech ilah. It seems like the moon is already full in the field, even before the melech ilah comes to the picture and sends its light down to the aretz. As I said, it was a complicated question. We had to have a little preface before that. But let's just say it one more time. If Gan Eden is already kol, which means it's already a full moon up there, then why are we saying that the full moon is after on the 15th of the month, only when the field will be worked and its light gets sent down to the earth, right? It looks like the field, even without being worked,
Right.
is already full, because the field represents Gan Eden. That's the question that we had.
The field represents?
The field is Gan Eden, the earth is the regular world.
Whether it's worked or not.
Whether it's worked or not. Right? Okay. That's where we left off.
Pretty much far out.
That's the question. So starting with in Os Dalid, here's our man. Starting in Os Dalid, the second paragraph in Os Dalid. V'yesh lomar Rabbi Bazeh. So we can say the explanation is as follows. Tamis is a inyan de kaima sihara bashlamusa. That the real truth of the moon being full, hu shashleimus ubaofen she'ein shayach sheyeh chesarim, is that the fullness is in such a way that it's not even relevant that it would ever be lacking again. We had this exact same concept in the last mimer that we learned. We talked about the fact that that rich and poor, if you recall, right? Rich and poor, we said tefil la'ani. And it's not so far out there. The Rabbi actually brings a quote at the bottom in the footnotes regarding this notion of rich and poor. So we said there's the idea of filling your lack, and there's the idea of having so much that you have abundance that it's not even relevant to fill your lack anymore. And when it comes to filling your lack, you could be poor and require your basic bread, but you could also be more or less wealthy, and if you're lacking a horse to run in front of you, and a horse to ride and a servant to run in front of you, which is basically, if you would have those things, you would seemingly be rich, but it's still called filling your lack. If you're a person who normally has a horse and a servant, then lacking those things is also called a lack. And therefore even replenishing of those things, even though you'd be sitting on top of the world, you're still not called rich. You just met your lack has been filled. But something which is like an abundance of wealth, which would make it so you'll never have a lack again, right? You have so much that it's impossible to ever have a lack. That's what's called really rich. And so we see from here that even though you can have all the revelations, even revelations which are beyond your meager needs, like you have more than you have delicacies, it still could be called just a feeling of a lack, and it's not called true shleimus. It's not called true wholeness or true abundance. And so what he's saying here, relating it back to this mimer, is that even though there is such a thing as a full moon in Gan Eden all the time, right? Still, it's not full to the point that it's not able to be in a state of lack. In other words, it's that light itself, if you think about it, was light that was removed and then was replenished.
Right.
Because that was the light that Hashem did remove in order to make the world. It's just that He brought that revelation back in the Gan Eden. So what do we see from there? That it's a light which is relevant to be taken away. Even though presently it's not taken away, but the fact that it comes from a level of light which was removed and replenished means that it's not an eternal light which is not even shaykh to be taken away. And therefore it's not called true wholeness or fullness or richness as long as it's able to be, it's susceptible to lack. You understand that?
You talk about the highest Gan Eden?
Yeah, all Gan Eden. It's basically, what is the light of Gan Eden? It's light that was removed, and then the revelation was replenished for the souls of Gan Eden. Because in order to make the world, all the worlds, He had to remove the light to begin with. It's just that He brought the light back for the higher worlds.
Isn't God even beyond this world? So
The higher worlds.
the light was taken from there also?
Sure, all the worlds had to be, there was a tzimtzum of the entire space. There was nothing, basically. And then he brought back the light, and it increasingly, in decreasing levels of revelation. So in the lowest worlds, like our world, all the light was still removed. But in the higher worlds, he replenished much of the light.
So how is that determined if there's a lack or abundance? I mean, how is it established? Like someone can be poor and be fine with what they have. Is it really from the person or is it from upstairs?
Poor and find what they have.
You know what I mean? Or
Content.
I think we're talking about a situation where it's wealth, simple and physical wealth, and spiritual wealth. Like we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu. To feel la'asha, we said the only person who's truly rich is Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe was actually rich physically, and he was also rich spiritually, to the point that there was nothing, no delicacy, nothing that he didn't have at his disposal. So in other words, I mean theoretically, they say about Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi that he was one of the richest people that ever lived, and yet at the end of his life he threw up his hands and said that none of his fingers ever did anything that wasn't l'shem shamayim. It doesn't mean you have to engage or indulge in like a life of gluttony, God forbid. But there's no lacking of anything that you could possibly want. So if you feel that you have a lack, that's one thing to be happy with your lot, okay. But I'm saying if there is a lack in any way, you're not rich.
so like for a normal regular guy,
We're not rich.
somebody that's like, I'm fine, I don't need it. Like it comes from within, or it's established from the self. Or?
I mean, I would imagine if a person got to such a state of their own being that they were truly happy with their lot, it becomes richness.
Right.
In other words, it means that Pashat, if you anything you need, you do have. It's like a certain level of bitachon at that point that, if the money's not in your bank account, it's in someone else's bank account, but it's available to because you have like this deep connection. There's no lack. Literally, there's no lack of resources. Probably the fact that we feel a lack of resources because we don't have that level of bitachon. We're spiritually lacking, and therefore we also find ourselves physically lacking.
It comes from the person.
Theoretically, I mean, it all comes from the person. Okay, but the point over here is that the moon, what's considered truthfulness of the moon is when it's full in a way that it's not even relevant to be lacking ever again. But Shleima Zu, he dafka keshamshacha he me'or shelamayla meshayches la'olamos. This can only come about, this wholeness can only come about when the hamshach is coming from a level of light which is beyond any relationship to the worlds. So again, she'ein shayach sheyeh bo tzimtzum, that it's not even relevant that it would be a tzimtzum in this light. So what we're saying here is that basically, again, the light which replenished the world, and replenished Gan Eden, and basically brought back all kinds of godly revelations, it did at one point get contracted, right? Because all the light was shining, Hashem contracted all the lights that were going to tamper with His world, being able to experience, and then He brought them back. So that light which got contracted and came back, it's obviously relevant to being contracted. A tzimtzum can affect it. There was light that never got removed. There's an infinite light which never went anywhere in the begin with. The tzimtzum didn't happen on that light. That light was never touched. So in order to have an enduring, eternal state of revelation, where the tzimtzum can never touch, you have to draw from that level of light, which is impervious to a tzimtzum. That would create something which is unreducible. So until you have that light, you don't have what's called the full moon.
But at that point, is that the hay is removed? Are we talking about the beginning?
It's beyond the hay even, because the hay was talking about those 5 levels of lights that were removed in order to create the world.
Removed or concealed?
Concealed, let's say, right? But we're talking about a level beyond that which was never removed in order to create the world. It was never seized and done away with in order for the space of the world to happen. It just stayed there forever, godly revelation, eternal. It's before the first contraction, right? And even the first contraction, even the first contraction didn't contract it, right? The first contraction didn't contract all the light. It only contracted the light which is relevant to making worlds with. That light which is completely beyond the conversation of worlds or not, nothing ever happened to that. So that light, if you can get your hands on it, it would make it so that it's truly whole and it's not even relevant to being taken away. And yeah, we're saying basically that that's Keter. I mean, Keter is a very broad word. It incorporates a lot of things. But here we're talking about Keter. The or hashayach le'olamos, because the light which is relevant to worlds, gam ha'or shekodem hatzimtzum, even the light which existed before the tzimtzum, hu or kazeh sheshayach bo tzimtzum, is still a light which tzimtzum is relevant to happen to. So the light that was there before the tzimtzum, okay, so it preceded the tzimtzum, but the tzimtzum did a job on it. So you see that it's still a type of light which is relevant to being contracted.
So that's not what we're looking for.
That's not what we're looking for.
Vulnerable.
We need a light which is not only before the tzimtzum, but which is impervious to the tzimtzum. V'lachein amshach ad bechinas kol shebegan Eden, and therefore that which is drawn down into Gan Eden, which is called kol, av shamshacha hi b'shleimos, even though that is a fullness of perfection, as it were. Kanal ba'maimer, as we said it before in the Maimer, the perush kol hu kol bli chasaron, that the word kol means totally full and without any lack, which means it has the yesod, it has the 50 gates of bina. In other words, it's a total restoration. Kevan shamshacha hi meor mugbal, but nonetheless, since that hamshacha comes from a limited light in its own right, which is called mochin, as we said, the highest part is the 50 gates of bina, which nonetheless are bina. They're still like, even bina, which is basically, the 50 gates of bina represents the totality of the Seder Ishtalshalus. It's still part of the brain, it's still part of the mind. Sheshayich sheyeh bo tzimtzum v'hefsek. And when it comes to brain and mind, brain and mind is shayich, tzimtzum, and hefsek. Meaning to say that in the brain, there's certainly the notion of tzimtzum because it's a light which is limited to being understood. So the light has to basically be contracted into a vessel. And hefsek as well, right? You're not always having the power of the mind. Sometimes the mind can be in a state of revelation. Sometimes the mind can be in a state of concealment. So it's not constant. And therefore, eino amisis hashlemus, that level of light from bina, from kol, is not true wholeness, because even though it's full and everything's there, it's not consistently always there. It could be taken away. And in the footnote here, he says this whole concept of rich and meeting your lack, like we said in the previous member, your lack being met versus your having abundance. Whereas the Amis sees in the Kai Masihar Bashla, the real notion of the true full moon, who are the avodah the Torah mitzvahs. It only comes about with the avodah of Torah mitzvahs. In other words, the sadeh ne'evad, right? Not just the field, which is burning brightly up there, but the worked field.
That's the work.
The work of Torah mitzvahs can access this level which is completely beyond the tzimtzum.
That's the answer there.
Yeah, because only Torah mitzvahs can draw down a light which are completely unlimited at the level of the light before the tzimtzum, and not only the light before the tzimtzum, but the light which is not even relevant to being contracted. The Torah mitzvah is a light which is higher than any connection and relationship to the worlds at all. So even when Hashem removed all of His light in order to make a space for the worlds, the Torah mitzvahs just stood there completely unaffected by that. They were not reduced or contracted. Nothing happened to them. They just were there waiting for the rebound. She'ein shayach bo tzimtzum. It's not relevant in them tzimtzum. And that's the meaning of the words melech l'sadeh ne'evad.
Not relevant and totally impervious at all.
Right, because if you think about a tzimtzum, actually, I'm glad you jumped in there. The idea of tzimtzum is only relevant when it comes to light, right? There's a big conversation that takes place in Chassidus talking about if the tzimtzum is pshuto or lav pshuto. You ever heard this phrase? So basically,
simple or not simple? Yeah,
like do we take the tzimtzum simply, like there was a tzimtzum and there was an absence and it was empty? Or lav pshuto, which is what we think. No, chas v'shalom, it wasn't empty. There's no such thing as empty. God is always there.
Just reduced.
Or you could say that what was reduced was the light.
Right.
But in that empty space, it was empty even of God? So there was people that wanted to, there was big people actually, names not necessary right now, but there was big sages in Israel that wanted to say that Mamish God took himself out of certain places and it's empty of God. It's like the devil. And it comes down to sort of this phrase like God is not in the bathroom. Right? In places where it's impure and there's no godliness, literally there's no godliness. Right? So the Alter Rebbe was of the champions of saying that this is foolish, basically. There's no such thing as God not being in a place. But what's contracted and what's removed when the Arizal says in simple words, there was a tzimtzum and they created a void. The Arizal says that they were arguing about the words of the Arizal, is that it's void of light. But the essence cannot be voided out of a place. The essence is always there. It's impervious. So the tzimtzum is not relevant to the essence because the essence cannot be contracted. It can't be reduced or added onto.
And that's Torah mitzvahs?
So the level of Torah mitzvahs is there at that level of essence, certainly, right? And so therefore, even though all the light of the world was reduced, it didn't have any effect whatsoever on the presence of the Torah mitzvahs. They were there equally. And not only that, this goes into a very deep thing, that in that place which we call empty, which is basically this big void which the world needed to come into that space in order to be created, that emptiness was not only not empty, it was empty of the light, and therefore it was filled with only and exclusively the essence. So darkness in that moment is not darkness, it's actually the greatest revelation of God that ever took place, was the removal of the light and the presence of what was not light, which is Him alone.
There's no Malchut in that light, in that presence at all?
What do you mean by makif?
There's got to be sun, so the essence, but there's sunlight.
Why did the light is something that the essence can reveal or not reveal. And the fact is, when we see the revelations of the light come off, we get all excited because, wow, it's Or Ein Sof. But the Or Ein Sof is only a tiny ray of God. It's just trying to reveal Him. It's not Him. Why does it reveal itself as Or Ein Sof? Because when you're going to try and reveal something essential, it just goes on forever. But so we get all excited about the Or Ein Sof because it's like an unending revelation, but an unending revelation of what?
Right.
Of Him. And Him is totally unknowable and frankly dark, right? Because we can't know anything about it. So therefore, that empty space that Hashem sort of sorted out, it's not what people think. It's like that is the essence of God. And therefore, dafke in the world, where you have this ability to do Torah mitzvahs and so forth, we have access to His essence because right there in that place, He basically revealed the source of Torah mitzvahs. When the lights are shining, you can't see the essence. So when He took away the lights, He actually revealed the essence, which is suddenly the Torah mitzvahs. That's the one thing that didn't go away because they're not relevant to tzimtzum. So this is actually the level of Keter that we're really talking about. It's also called a certain level of Keter, right? So only when you'll sort of get that, your hands on that, can you have something which is truly eternal because it's not even relevant to contraction.
Well,
and that can create really a full moon. So the full moon in Kol or Yesod or up in Gan Eden, it's full, but it's not the true meaning of the word full moon.
because it's not worked for?
Because there was no work involved,
Right.
it doesn't access the true eternal light, and therefore, even though it's full, it's suspect, it's susceptible to someday not being full. Because at one point it wasn't full, and theoretically it could not be full again.
So to return to the question of even when we don't do a Buddha and it's still full every month?
So that's definitely that's what this mimer is getting into. If you recall, I'm going to sort of give away a little bit of the end because he asked the right question. He talked about 3 different types of full moon: a regular full moon, the full moon of the holidays, 4 types: the full moon of Yom Kippur, and then the full moon of Tisha B'Av, or of Tu B'Av. That's what the mimer started off with. So he's basically saying there's different types of full moons out there.
Right.
And this one is the greatest of all the full moons.
Right.
So we're going to get into this idea that even though
So there are different, different types.
there's different types of fullness.
And they might look from the just average onlooker as the same one, but they're not the same one.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right. So going on. Hey, Reb David, here's a mimer for you. He named Mavur Ba Mimer. So the Rebbe Rashab describes in the mimer the Besadeh Asher Berchu Avaya Shnei Perushim. So all of a sudden we're talking about a pasuk from Parshas Toldos, where Yaakov comes in dressed like Esav, right? And Yitzchak tells him, "My son, you smell like a field that Hashem has blessed." and he was talking about Gan Eden, and how did Yitzchak know what Gan Eden smelled like? Because during the Keter he went there, right? And he was in Gan Eden for a while.
2 years, no, 2 years.
2 years, yeah. So he came back. So Yaakov smelled like Gan Eden, and Yitzchak said that you smell like a field that Hashem has blessed. So what are we seeing here? This goes well with what we're talking about. A sadeh, asher berechu Hashem. A sadeh is a field, and the field represents Gan Eden, right? So in this Indian of a field that Hashem has blessed, which is Gan Eden, basically, Shnei Perushim, it has two meanings. Perush Rashi, Shu Gan Eden. So if you look in the Chumash, Rashi says this was Gan Eden, as we just described. But Perush HaTargum Yonasan, Shu Beis HaMikdash. So the Targum Yonasan says that the field that Hashem has blessed, and you smell like it, is really the temple, the Beis HaMikdash. Different, it's not the Pshat, it's the Targum Yonasan. Umavur Bakam Makomos, it's explained in many places. The Beis HaMikdash Shu Kamo Gan Eden. Then nonetheless, there's not that big a difference between the two explanations, because the Beis HaMikdash was like a little Gan Eden. The whole idea is that the Garden of Eden that Adam was made in, he was banished from it, right? The whole concept was basically that when Hashem came back into the world and gave us the Mishkan and sort of dwelled amongst man again, and eventually we created like a permanent home for him in the Beis HaMikdash, it was the reinstitution of Gan Eden. That experience that Adam experienced in Gan Eden is what Yidden felt when they went into the Beis HaMikdash. It was like Gan Eden again. They made it again on earth. Hashem restored it unto a certain place. So they're very connected with each other. V'kamosh b'Gan Eden yesh beis madregos, and just like in Gan Eden, there are two levels of Gan Eden. There's Gan Eden mitzad atzmo. There's just the stam Gan Eden. But Tosafos or Shenimshach bo ha'idei avoda. And as we just described, there's an additional pouring out of light into it, which comes through avoda. Sadeh ne'evat.
Oh, it's additional.
Right, there's Gan Eden.
It's like just the normal Gan Eden.
We said like Gan Eden Lamayla, right? It's like full.
Right.
But that's not what we really call the full moon. The full moon is when that Gan Eden will come down and express itself also on the Aretz. So when that happens, it's because Keter is shining, as we said. So when Keter shines, it shines right into Gan Eden, and it amps it up, giving it the power to spill over even into the earth. Wow. So that's called an extra measure of light that's flowing into Gan Eden.
Is that the meaning of in Bereishit where it says man has to toil the field? I thought that was seen as almost like a curse.
Yeah, I would say that that's a good point. Before he has to toil in the regular earth, because he's banished from Gan Eden. In Gan Eden itself, Adam was issued a command, la'avdu l'shamra, to serve and guard the Gan Eden itself, which means that's more like what we're talking about right presently. That in Gan Eden there's work to be done. So when Adam Harishon was already in Gan Eden, he was issued a command to work it, even though there was no gullus yet. So that's what we're talking about right now. The Gan Eden is already great, and with work it can become greater. When he went and was banished, and then he was given like a curse to work it, he's not working Gan Eden anymore. That's a work that he's doing basically to get the world back to a state of Gan Eden, so that we could start over again and work Gan Eden like we were supposed to in the first place.
So that's not the working of this field that he's talking about the mind.
Right, the working of the field like in Gullus is working the earth more like than working the field. But at the same time, that's going to come up as well. You know, we're not able to just stop working Gan Eden anymore, right? Because we're not in it. So when we do the avodah of Torah mitzvahs, we're doing the work here, right? Like in the gullus, in the exiled part. But it does also still create the extra measure of light to come into Gan Eden as well. But not be confusing. Just there is the notion of working in Gan Eden. So Gan Eden itself has two levels. There's a Stam Gan Eden, it was wonderful to be there, come back again. And it was Adam working the Garden of Eden in order to get this level of light up from Keter to come in.
So this isn't fully relevant to us, or was it only relevant on the holiday of Tu B'Av?
No, it'll be relevant to us as well. In other words, it's going to wind up talking about the whole avodah in the Zman HaGalus, basically. but not relevant at this particular juncture. We'll get there soon. Okay, so we see that there's two levels of avoda, there's two levels of Gan Eden. Gan Eden stam, Gan Eden with avoda. Ba'al derech zeh hu bebeis hamikdash. And the same is true when it comes to the temple, which we said was like Gan Eden. The nosaf al gilu shaya bebeis hamikdash misar atzmo, that in addition to the revelation that was just already in the Beis Hamikdash by being a virtue of its being the Beis Hamikdash, it was a great place. Harei ayidei avoda Beis Hamikdash, but then there's avoda in the Beis Hamikdash. Avodas are karbanos, right? You're doing the sacrifices. Heirbo gilui naili yoser. So at the moment of the sacrifice, it was even revealed in a higher revelation than just stam all the time Beis Hamikdash. So you see, the Gan Eden and Beis Hamikdash, they both have two levels. Al pi mashakasu ba maimer, according to what we said in the maimer, sha'inin dekai masi harbash lamusa, that the notion of the moon being full, hu beikar agde avoda besadeh, it's mainly by the work in the field, not just on being a field, but the work in the field. Melech lesadeh ne'evad, that you get the level of melech, the melech ilah, the keser, only when this field is worked. Move on, so it's understood the kamo kain hu gam b'nogei lebeis hamikdash. Then the same is true also regarding the Beis Hamikdash. She'inin dekai masiyar b'ashlemusa, that the main notion of the fullness of the moon, shayab Beis Hamikdash misad atzmo, that the Beis Hamikdash in itself implicitly represented the notion that it was like a full moon. We're going to see in a second. I think he brings it inside. Yeah, but what generation was the temple built in? The 15th generation from Moshe, right? So that the 15th is like a full moon in terms of the times of generation. So just Bechlal, it was a full moon, even without a voda.
What was the second Beis? What period was
That I'm not sure exactly, but the famous concept is that from Moshe from Avraham until Shlomo was 15 generations.
No, Moshe too.
Moshe?
that? Moshe.
It was 10.
What's that?
I think Moshe was 10, wasn't it?
What do you mean 10? From Avram to Moshe was 7,
7.
and I think from Moshe to Shlomo was another 8. Could be wrong, but we'll look into that.
It's possible.
I think it's from Abraham. So the Indian is that so the fullness of the moon regarding the Beis Hamikdash on its own, right? Hen hamakom the Beis Hamikdash, regarding the place of the Beis Hamikdash itself, as it says, the leis dein asar hedyot. This is not a place of simple people. This is like just walking into the place was a full-on revelation of God. V'chein hazman the Beis Hamikdash, also the time of the Beis Hamikdash, which was nivna al yedei Shlomo dor hatesvav la'Avraham. Okay, that's good. Once in a while we get a little hammer in the nail. So he says that both in terms of the place, it was a full moon because it was basically a divine place, and the time it was a full moon because it was 15 generations that it was built. Sha'az kaim masihar v'ashlemusa, which means that the 15 generations, Shlomo represented the full moon of 15 generations from Abraham. So all that represents just a stam Gan Eden, as it were, without any avoda. It was just itself was already a divine thing. Sadeh, the field, whereas the Iker kaim masihar b'ashlemusa, but the main fullness of the moon of the Beis Hamikdash, Shayab Beis Hamikdash, hu ayidei avod the Beis Hamikdash, it only came about through the service of the Beis Hamikdash, which was the karbanos. Nimshach v'tosefes or shelamayla mishtalshlus, and only when the karbanos were accomplished did it get this extra measure of light, which is above the seder ishtalshlus, which was therefore enabling it to basically push its light also down into the dark side of the moon, right? In other words, really what it had was like the moon was full only from one side. The Gan Eden element of the moon was full. But the idea of the moon being full on both sides only happened when the karbanos were accomplished.
Is there like an application to that? Like the light that's coming down?
What do you mean application?
Like the avodah that's being done, the mitzvah in the Torah, and then we say like the culmination is like in Gan Eden, the work that's being done there, like in the Beis Hamikdash, the work that's being done there. Like when it comes back, does that propel us to do more? Like is there like a relevance to that, or we haven't gotten there yet, or it's not that?
You mean like on a personal level?
Yeah, like.
I guess
like
a person
the
has
Indian
a.
type of thing.
I guess a person's personal Beis Hamikdash, right, is sort of like their godly soul, right? So you have this notion of.
So it makes it easier for the godly soul, or it brings more.
You have this
strength to the
notion
godly
of
soul?
like, of mind and heart in your godly soul,
Right.
right? And the idea of the mind and heart, they could be illuminated. In other words, inwardly you could be illuminated. But for that illumination to go and extend itself out into, let's say, your animal soul, to go into the dark side,
Right.
it requires the avodah of Torah mitzvahs. The avodah of Torah mitzvahs draws the godly emotions and intellect into your garments of your actual goof.
Right.
So that you see that the Torah and the mitzvahs, they have the ability to take the godliness out of sort of the Gan Eden of yourself and draw them down into the earth of yourself. Showing that really, until you have those Torah mitzvahs, the godly soul in itself is, even though it's perfect, it's really not the true perfection. Because so long as that perfection can be relegated, then it's not really true perfection. It's
Right.
not true abundance, which is like it's not even relevant in it a lack.
There can be tzimtzum to it.
It's all connected. Like it's coming back to the mimer we learned about Tzion b'mishpat tipade ushaveh b'tzedakah. Right? We said Tzion and her captives represent the essence of the godly soul and the lower parts of the godly soul, and by all of them it's relevant. By both of them it's relevant. Gullus, right? One can be banished and one can be even captured. So the idea that they're perfect is still, it's a type of perfection which is relevant a lack. Whereas if you bring them into a state of consistency, it's mamash, all the Maimarim really are saying the same thing. If you bring them into a state of consistency, how do you do that? Because you access parts of your soul which are beyond both of them, right?
Right.
Which is basically what we're talking now, the Keter. So then you're able to, which is over there we talked about like the Indian of Mesiris Nefesh and Kabbalah's Ol. So then you're able to ensure that all the godliness will also be present in your animalistic life as well. Mm-hmm. And that shows on a true consistency, because once the animal is turned on for Hashem, then it's not relevant anymore, removal, right? So it is all very practical in that sense. Okay. Going on. Well, a little bit further here. So it's not so complicated. All we're saying is there's a difference between when there's work being done and when there's not work being done. When the work's being done, you get not only the Indian of Kol, but also the Indian of Keter, which extends it down into the lower dimensions as well. Accordingly, we can say that the revelation that took place just in the temple on its own, the revelation was only good for the temple time alone. In other words, that revelation of the Beis Hamikdash didn't keep on going. It had a certain shelf life.
And that was only while the karbanos were being burnt?
What's that?
Was that only...
No, the Indian of the temple on its own, we're saying, right?
Yeah.
Just the regular level 1 of the Beis Hamikdash, which is without avoda. It was limited because it represents a light which is relevant to lack, right? Even though it's a fullness, it's relevant to lack, and therefore it didn't go on forever. It could be destroyed. As it's explained in the Maimer, that what's the difference between the time of the temple to the time of the exile? He says the exact same parallel. It's an example of the higher half of the moon versus the lower half of the moon. Right? In other words, that the higher half of the moon was likened to the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the time of temple times. And lower half of the moon is likened to exile times. Because the higher half of the moon is like an Indian, we say it's like Gan Eden. And the temple is like Gan Eden. So the light's always shining over there, but it doesn't mean that the light is able to take its shine from there and send it to another place. So it was during the time on earth when the temple was standing, the higher part of the moon was basically in effect. And it was like Gan Eden, but it was an aspect of Gan Eden which was susceptible to being removed. Which, as we said in general, the normal light of Gan Eden without avoda is susceptible to being removed. or mugbal, and since that level of revelation of the Beis Hamikdash on its own, without avoda, is a limited light, shemei rak ba'adarga de malchus shemekabelas mizah, which shines only into that aspect of Malchus, which is the higher part of Malchus, which we spoke about 2 days ago, which receives from Zah, like the Penimius of Malchus, right? Which is called Chetzi Kadura Elyun Tilabana. Another way of looking at it is the higher part of the moon, the part of the moon that the light always shines on. So since the Beis Hamikdash only received that light, Haisam Shachaso Rak Bizman Habayis, therefore, that its ability to be drawn down was only during the temple times, because it was limited light that had a shelf life. Whereas the light which was added on to the temple through avoda, which the avodas karbanos, which is the avoda of the karbanos, and additionally the avoda of, he's bringing it basically like into our time a little bit, that make me a temple and I will dwell with you. In other words, we also have access to this type of avoda. We can't offer the karbanos mamash, we can something like offer the karbanos in our Torah mitzvahs. So this measure of light which is added to the Beis Hamikdash through avoda, kevan she'or zehu bli gavul, since that light is unlimited, because it comes from the Keter, which is no limitation, not part of the Hishtalshalus, she'ein shayach bo hefsek, it can never be interrupted, it's an eternal light that seems to never even happen to it. Therefore, hamshachasahu gam bizman hagalus, that is also found in the time of Galus. So actually the higher light of the Beis Hamikdash, the light which is drawn down through the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, it does not cease. And it's also be able to be found even when the moon, so to speak, is not clearly shining down here. So well, hold on a second, that doesn't make any sense, because we don't experience light. This is supposed to be like a fullness of light, which is a measure of, it's able to even illuminate the darkness. So he says, but the problem is, mitzad yeridish b'zman hagalus, because of the descent that took place in the time of Galus, eina or nirgash ba'olam, we don't feel this light in the world. As we'll explain further about that next time, and he says in chapters Vav. But the point is that there is that eternal light which was harnessed through the avoda of the Beis Hamikdash, which is basically a Keter light, which is able to be everywhere. It's able to even bring infinity also onto earth, just because the, so to speak, good times of Gan Eden can dissipate, because they are a limited light. That eternal light can never dissipate, and therefore it extended even into the time of Galus. And why don't we feel like an eternal revelation? We're going to have to get to that point, because theoretically we should. But he's saying ultimately, because the exile itself sort of dimmed our senses, so we have access to that light, but we don't feel it at the present time.
What does that mean? To feel it.
To feel it means we'd be in a state of like being in the Beis Hamikdash all the time and higher, right? We'd be like in the Beis Hamikdash during the karbanos. Like a certain light of Keter means that in a perfect world you would have that light and also experience Gan Eden at the same time. Mm-hmm. So we have that light, we don't experience Gan Eden, but it doesn't mean we don't have that light, because that light is an eternal light which is impervious to contraction. But it doesn't always come along with basically being able to feel it. It's just that we have it, and what's the proof that we have it? We have Torah and mitzvahs. In other words, we have the ability to access this level of eternality which existed even after the Tzimtzum was gone. The Torah mitzvahs were still there, and they're in our hands to deal with. So we have this eternal light. It's just that we don't see the light coming out of it when we do the mitzvahs at the present time.
That's part of the job. Mashiach is going to reveal he's going to remove the filters.
Right, exactly. All right, so we're still in the middle. We left off with another question this time.
Wow. Do we have the next page?
We have it on the back, yeah.
Oh, on the back. Woo!